Whether it's crippling someone for just buying a dime bag or jaywalking, or spiraling into his own self-destructive brooding brain, Batman is one of the few comic book heroes you don't aspire to be. There are plenty of smaller or more obscure examples, but as far as known heroes who belong on the Mount Rushmore of comic book characters everyone's always arguing about, Batman is the only one who isn't an ideal to strive for. He is essentially a perfect person, so you should want to be like him, but as for healthy communication and his personality, it's impossible to deny he's not a good person, at least at his worst. Superman and Spider-Man both have their flawed moments, as they should, but they fundamentally stand for ethically and morally superior ideals to work toward. Not that Batman can't. In fact, a lot of people ignore his kind and gentle side, but the Dark Knight and his stories are more often utilized to highlight the twisted and complex psyche hidden beneath humanity's righteous facade. So because of that, Batman always ends up hurting those he's closest to, sometimes physically. But is that a constant of being a superhero? A byproduct of the cancerous trauma always lingering within him? Or a fault in his writing? I hope to give you a definitive answer in this video, yet no matter what, one thing that remains true is how none of that is going to change anytime soon. However, that doesn't have to be a bad thing, as long as that isn't just the stock standard status quo, and rather used as a point to springboard into the dissections of complex themes and ideas. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, your nihilistic optimist, and despite me being an undeniable fanboy of his, willing to take his side no matter how unjustified an action of his is, I can't deny the simple fact that Batman is a dick. Naturally, he's existed for a long time, and until very recently, though honestly not even then, hasn't changed. Writers have tried and failed to shake up his status quo on multiple occasions, but one thing has made itself very apparent. It will always come back. Which is similar to just about any long-enduring comic character in that if they have a known status quo, then people will obviously want to see that when picking up a story of theirs. And maybe it's just because Batman and Superman have some of the most popular origin stories and established worlds, but people do not like it when they're changed. Superman has been able to break out of that mold with his son Jonathan officially taking on his mantle, but moving on from Bruce Wayne and letting the next generation of heroes take that torch is something people will never allow to happen. What can I say? Fans like that Gotham City status quo maybe a little too much. And then there's my own perspective, because I just like reading dark mysteries. And while that is more than possible with a Robin or two still present in a story, it's often seen as required for Batman to be alone in those scenarios for a noir vibe to come across. So to explain that, rather than ignore it, good writers have chosen to contextualize the brooding bat with characterization that not only gives reason to every stupid moment people make fun of, but makes those moments retroactively fit who Batman is. As a matter of course, he's dark and mysterious, which is a cool trait that lets him stand out when he's the main character, but whenever he's not, that broody atmosphere can only ever be viewed as unhealthy, where Bruce forges his own inner circle into an extreme comfort zone, a place where no one can get close enough to hurt him. In which the distinction needs to be made that Bruce isn't incapable of effective emotional communication, because Batman has to be the best at everything, and that includes socializing, but I like the idea that he's intricately informed and skilled at utilizing his charisma when need be, able to infiltrate any group and become one of them with ease. And I haven't mentioned the playboy side of Bruce, but that's just because it's not really relevant. He definitely has fun with it, and more of that should be seen, like Nolan's Batman just acting like a drunken dick and telling everyone to leave to save them. Would love to see Pattinson's Bruce utilize some of that charm, but none of that is him. It's just a facade he puts up. But when it comes to genuine interaction, bonding with someone and displaying authentic emotion, that's something Bruce rarely, if ever, does. Something he knows full well is incredibly unhealthy, but just doesn't, given that for every dark abyss he stares into without blinking or flinching for even a millisecond, there are some conversations Bruce will run away from for his entire life, either being afraid of it or just not deeming it necessary to deal with. And that's where his relatability comes into the picture. If not for those very human flaws being portrayed as human, I would have to agree with the claim that Batman is a terrible person who should have just donated all of his money to charity. Something he still does, but is all worth it for the net positive he brings to Gotham. And for Bruce's internal therapy, it helps to go out and try to fix the rot plaguing his city. The violence doesn't help, but saving lives does. But all that to say, people like it when Batman is a perpetual loner. And I'm not mad that he is, because rich character work is typically weaved into the reader's need for him to be that perpetual loner, whether it's the writer's exclusive desire to do so, or just an external top-down mandate for the story to sell. But in that, there's a whole can of worms that I have yet to open. That, of course, being Robin himself, who, if you didn't already know, has existed for just as long as Batman. To tell the truth, I can't help but point out this fun fact every time I get the chance, but Batman was a character for less than a year before Robin was invented to join him, instantly boosting his comic sales and cementing that dynamic duo into the eternal halls of unforgettable pop culture icons. So just remember that it's only thanks to Robin that Batman is so popular. Yet acknowledging that fact doesn't magically fix the problems that arise thanks to Batman having a sidekick. Chiefly with his need to be a perpetual loner, not really mixing with the fact that he also has a half dozen Robins running around town at any given moment nowadays, creating completely contradictory images of Batman, sometimes with an extended Bat family, and sometimes without. Yet either way, always interpreted as the same hermit, bringing some cohesiveness, but not nearly enough to negate the issue. And the easiest way to explain that is sometimes the writers want to include the Bat family, and sometimes they want a solo detective story, which aren't mutually exclusive, but what creates that distinction is what the writer wants. I've always preferred seeing at least a few members of the Bat family pop up, perking up with even a mention of their name whenever reading a Batman comic, but sometimes the writers crafting a new story just don't want them included. Something that is more than fair, especially considering how difficult it is to include one, if not all of them, which reminds me of a massive ensemble action movie, attempting to cram in as many plot threads as it can so that every member of the extremely long extended cast has something to do. And at that point, giving any of those numerous threads any kind of emotional importance just makes them dull and cliched, since there is never enough time to actually develop anything. Regardless, including even one Robin into a Batman story is hard, and doesn't have to be incorporated into the narrative if the writers don't want that, by and large because it's pretty easy to write around. Why is Tim the only Robin here? Well, it's because the rest are out on an assignment. That can even be tied into one of their solo runs, which is always fun, but doesn't have to be the case either. So long as there's a throwaway line establishing that the writers didn't forget about them, gets me satisfied enough to continue reading without that becoming an issue down the line. But for that throwaway line to make sense, it also has to logically mesh with what Batman as a character would allow. And without getting into whether he should or shouldn't have a Robin, I've got a whole video about it. Ethically no, but story-wise yes, he needs a Robin. I'll instead dive into the ethical problems with sending those Robins out on missions. And I'll concede that not all of these missions are necessarily life-threatening or even coming from Batman 100% of the time. However, it's not cool for anyone to send a lone teenager away on a potentially dangerous spy mission. And that may bring to mind the exact kind of vacation I would have loved at that age. But even with a large per diem, which I'm only assuming they get, no child should ever have to be responsible for themselves. Nevertheless, that thought never comes up when I'm reading a Batman story. The Robins are just out, allowing for a lone and brooding Batman to be at the center of a new citywide conspiracy. Of course, I have yet to bring up the fact that some of these stories are just written out of continuity and are set in a vague time period before Bruce adopts his many, many children, like Dark Patterns, a recent series I'm enjoying that retells old comic stories, which really sells why the idea of continuity can hinder storytellers. But I still always prefer something to take place on the known DC timeline, even if it gets messy. And I've talked about this with almost every facet of storytelling, but it all comes down to the effort put in. If it's written lazily and thrown together without consideration as to why, then obviously it's gonna be bad. So with that in mind, let's actually look at why Bruce keeps pushing away all the people he cares so deeply for. Because in that, there are two answers. One that touches on the behind-the-scenes craft of storytelling, and one that touches on the actual character. But let's look at the behind-the-scenes answer first, because that's the one I've been vaguely circling around all video, which is that the majority of the time, writers have to cave to popular demands, creating engaging stories with mystery and drama compelling you to read on to the next issue, because without that, it's just a boring story, but most of all, maintaining the status quo to make the big bucks. And for that very reason, Batman will never stop being the Batman we all know. Even as an old man, people like seeing him clumsily Batman about. So how do writers contextualize that? They make him addicted to being Batman. People want to maintain the status quo? Well, so does Bruce. Which brings me to the in-story explanation that touches on the characters. Because in that, you can see Bruce upholding that trait of being constantly paranoid and untrusting. When working on a team, he will always purposefully withhold information to keep his secret plans at play. Happening over and over again, you'd think that the people around him would learn, but they rarely do. Personally, I've never had a problem with this. To me, Batman's knowledge is his superpower. That's how he gets the upper hand against godlike beings. To the point that people should call out Batman for being one of fiction's worst Mary Sue characters. And I've never been a big believer in the Mary Sue criticism, but in the past couple decades, you can't deny how Batman has become the embodiment of it, able to win any fight simply because the writers wanted him to. I know there's the prep time argument, but come on, he's just a dude. A rich, very smart dude, but a dude nonetheless. And all of this is extremely sacrilegious to say, I'm aware, but I was tired of Batman being the strongest character a decade ago, and it's only gotten worse. I like it when he's got plans and plans all the way from A to Z ready to initiate at every turn, but even he should be able to be caught by surprise. Yet thanks to him being seen as the most tactically intelligent person ever, it's always perceived as a point of lazy writing when someone manages to get the drop on him. And when it is there has to be so many dumb small details justifying how Batman didn't know about a certain conspiracy, or even just a person literally sneaking up on him. All of our heroes don't need to be infallible. And honestly, for me, this next example treads dangerously close to just being a mischaracterization. But in Arkham Asylum, not the video game, the comic by Grant Morrison that the video game was based off of, the Batman we see is very different to the one we're all familiar with. Because when confronted with the daunting task of entering a madhouse now run by the inmates, Bruce almost crumbles under its weight, which all comes from the straightforward launching off point of Batman questioning whether his actions are just or not, and whether he truly belongs in Arkham with all of the other crazy villains. And it's not that this interpretation of Batman is shown to be weak or anything, but a scared, indecisive side comes out of Bruce as he descends further into the pits of the deteriorated madhouse, all of which is underscored by Dave McKean's phenomenally surreal art. But at the end of this one formative issue, Batman confronts the frail evil doctor at the center of the breakout, only to get physically bested by him, and he's only able to break free from the doctor after the helpless hostage takes the knife that was just at her throat and uses it to kill the doctor. A moment of incompetence from Batman that I explain away because A, he's been fighting his rogues one by one and is physically tired, and B, is so far mentally gone, he can't focus on anything. Yet this right here, mischaracterization or not, proves exactly how an imperfect Batman can further the story, which is a great example in Morrison's Arkham Asylum, but can be a little too overwritten. And is that paired with the fact that, as I mentioned before, Batman is just a dude, the reality of how in over his head he really is shows its true colors. And once that idea is illustrated right, it can fundamentally change how he's seen for the better. Because I don't want Batman to lose or be on the back foot at all, but he has to be able to be put in that situation at least once in all of his stories, or else they become aimless and purposeless. Because because Batman can be seen as a dick if he's too overpowered and thus unrelatable. If he has a solution to every problem tucked away in his utility belt or somewhere in his seemingly infinite expertises, why should I get invested? I've brought it up before, but I see Batman and Superman as opposite ends of the same writing dilemma, where writers constantly back themselves into a corner because it's near impossible to make an interesting conflict-driven story about either. Of course, Batman is easier than the freight train moving at supersonic speeds that is Superman, but thanks to Batman being the guy who always wins given prep time, he's become just as difficult to write. Compared to a Batman with infinite intelligence, his villains suddenly need to be more competent, more manipulative, and more unbeatable, which isn't inherently a problem. In fact, that's a good thing. But even with good writers, can depict Bruce's character as someone most would consider a dick. Though I'll give some credit where it's due, because sometimes Batman is depicted as overpowered at times, and doesn't even seem human, yet acts exactly how I'd want him to. My favorite example of which would be the animated cartoon Brave and the Bold, who draws from Batman's Silver Age adventures and even some Adam West tendencies, meaning there's more of a light-hearted framework to it all, but is still 110% Batman, with some quips here and there only because after a decade or more of being Batman, Bruce has perfected it, and has been in every kind of villainous situation more than once, so always knows what to do. Yet that only really works when Batman isn't the main character. He may even be at the center of the narrative, but said story can only succeed because of the writer's understanding of how to play with that supremely invincible kind of Batman. Not unbeatable, because there's always gotta be villains on his level, but almost infallible, which shows how a Mary Sue-esque Batman could be perfect. Anyway, moving away from Bruce's mentality and getting back to him just straight up being a dick, of all the times Batman has hurt those he's closest to, the most obvious and the example that comes to mind for most is the iconic slap, which has become a meme, but in context is illustrated as a moment where Bruce got carried away with trying to take vengeance on Superman for convoluted reasons, and was always meant to be Bruce going too far, but has become an image unto itself. Yet of his many iconic slaps, of which there are sadly more than you think, I always go back to the time he backhanded Tim in City of Bane. And people hated that at the time, and I'm not about to say I stood and cheered when it happened, but when I read it, I thought it was very much in line with the character of Batman for this to happen, with Bruce using it as a way to push everyone away because he's scared they'll get hurt. Yet all that pales in comparison to All-Star Batman and Robin, in which Bruce does some stuff that is nothing short of sickening, featuring moments of Batman cussing out Robin with words that are very much not in line with his character, and even starving and forcing him to hunt for rats in the Batcave, something Robin thankfully didn't have to do because Alfred wasn't having it. However, even in that specific storyline, which is very much not canon and doesn't have any kind of explanation, more so the mad ramblings of Frank Miller just losing it, I just hand wave it away and say to myself, Batman was just having a really bad couple of months, something he's not adverse to doing on occasion. But for a much better canon instance would be one of the many times he has inevitably become one of the Justice League's best villains. Worst for the League, but best for us readers. After all, how could anyone forget the time when his contingency plans to neutralize every member of the Justice League were stolen by Ra's al Ghul and used to almost kill them? A lesson in trust Bruce would not learn. As always, deciding that being a paranoid but prepared mess was better, even instilling that same lesson in his Robins, making sure they knew how to systematically take down each of their teammates before even meeting the Teen Titans, which, to repeat, is how those regular old non-superpowered dudes even hold a candle to their teammates, plus makes sense in a universe where everyone can be mind-controlled at practically any moment, but is undeniably messed up. revealing a sort of superiority when it comes to how Batman views those around him, something that could turn him into the exact kind of evil he's trying to fight, if not for his compassion beneath it all, constantly at war with his brooding dickishness. Because more than anything, and if you're going to take one thing from this video, it should be that Batman's compassion is what truly drives him. Of course, he can't 100% be that kind person, mainly just because it would simplify his character and remove any of the interesting gray, but more people need to get with the program that Batman cares about the sanctity of life just as much as Superman does, bringing that same amount of gentle kindness to situations that need it. It's always overlooked when compared to his brutal, violent side, but Batman's entire mission is about preventing anyone from feeling the pain he has, children especially, and in that, I'm reminded of his confrontation with Ace in Justice League Unlimited, where he was tasked by Amanda Waller to kill this little girl before her reality-altering powers destroyed the world. And naturally, Batman refuses to end her life, but the minutes that follow are perfect heart-wrenching moments of him showing just how much he cares. And he has that side of him, not because it's innate or anything, but because for as brooding and calculating as he is, Bruce is a great father. I mean, he does use his adopted kids as weapons in his war, yet he undeniably loves all of his children. Yet that love paints a target on their backs, from the villains of Gotham, but also from Batman himself. And to say that all that started with the darker Alan Moore and Neil Adams stories would be a lie, because Batman has always been hurting those he cares about, the best demonstration of which comes from one of the greatest animated Batman movies ever. Well, not the best. Batman's got some of the best animated movies out there, but it's one that dissects who Bruce Wayne is while still being a wildly entertaining ride. No, not Mask of the Phantasm. Stay with me here. The Lego Batman movie, which had its fair share of fart jokes. That was the level the comedy was batting at a lot of the time, yet had an incredible amount of emotional depth and a lot of really good meta commentary and intelligent humor. Like when they spend the time to display how alone Bruce is. And he is doing some rich people stuff, like eating his lobster shell and all in a man cave underneath his house. He's also doing very real things, like forgetting which HDMI to plug into so you can watch a movie and forget your real life problems. Yet it took getting a Robin for this Bruce to truly realize what he was missing out on. And it's great because when it comes to its emotional core, it's simple, distilling the character of Batman into the purest essence of who we know. Someone who protects others, but often ends up protecting those he's closest to by pushing them away. And by the time he's learned the lesson not to, of choosing a found family and the happiness that follows, he forgets it for the next story arc.
Learn the value of friendship. I lost, and I'm good with it. And it's totally on brand for me to be a loner with a broken heart. It's what the fans want, so yeah, no, I'm good with it. Just me and Alfred.
But does that make him a dick? You know what? I feel like you know my answer to that, which is why I'll leave it up to you. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, not a sponsorship, but I have an affiliate partnership with NordVPN, which in case you didn't know is a virtual private network that really lets you feel at ease as you're surfing the web. I tried to cheat the system and set a VPN to another country to watch Peacemaker early, and it didn't work. But I felt like I was watching it early. But if you feel like using this exclusive offer, check out the link in the description. I mean, have fun with it. Watch Alien Earth on Disney+. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.